Thank you all for joining us today for this panel, the Trachtenberg School Alumni Panel. It is the first time we are doing this topic on the increasing need for data expertise in public service careers. The idea I had for this was in my work and seeing how much we are seeing and hearing about this from students, alumni, employers, academics, the role that data is increasingly playing in everyone's jobs and careers. So I wanted to start this panel. I had mentioned earlier, I just want to let people know, unfortunately, Tiffany Robinson, one of our alumni yesterday, informed me she would not be able to join us. She just started a new job and was pulled into doing a training, but I will be sharing her email address with everybody, and she's welcome to have, people are welcome to reach out to her. So without further ado, I am going to open this up to the introductions from our alumni panelists. I am so excited by the range of experience that we have here, the diversity of career paths, and I look forward to us having a very interesting conversation today about the role of data. So I've asked each of the alumni to share a little bit more about themselves, their career path, and the role of data in their work. We'll do for an introduction, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. And then the last 10 to 15 minutes, each of the alumni will be in a breakout room, which will give you an opportunity if you have some very specific questions you want to ask for an alum or want to have that individual time. So with that, Alicia, you are first on my screen. I'm going to start with you.
All right. Nice to be here, everybody. My name is Alicia Mazzara. I am the Deputy Director for Housing Equity and Data Analysis at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. That is a title they made up for me. And I have kind of an unusual job that I'll talk a little bit about in a second. But in terms of data, I would say, you know, when I worked for the federal government at the FTC for a few years before going to Trachtenberg, and then from Trachtenberg, I've had a number of different jobs at different kind of policy institutes, think tanks. I was at Pew Charitable Trust for a bit. I was at Third Way before I came to the Center on Budget, or CDPP, as we like to call it. And throughout all of those roles post Trachtenberg, like data has been certainly like an important piece of my work. I think particularly at the Center on Budget, one thing that we do that's a little different from some other kind of think tanks is that we actually do some original data analysis ourselves. Not so much the kind of academic stuff that you might have studied. We're not necessarily here doing like regression analyses or things like that, although we will use other people's academic research and write about it and talk about how it, you know, shows evidence for different policies that really look promising. But more so around, we work on a lot of programs that you might talk about or think of as the social safety net. So things like Medicaid, food stamps. I particularly work on housing programs. So like rental assistance, you might have heard of public housing, the Housing Choice Voucher Program. We work on this wide array of programs. But so we actually have a lot of data agreements or access to either large government data sets or government administrative data. So like a large part of my work for a long time here was working specifically on data from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, and using administrative data and analyzing that and using that to inform our housing policy work. And so I can talk a little bit more about administrative data and things like that, and how we kind of use more descriptive statistical analysis in our work. But we're really trying to tell stories with data, really trying to create like compelling arguments, really like visuals that really make an impact in our work. And then in terms of my sort of day-to-day, I have moved from doing the data analysis myself over the course of my time at the center to really managing other people that do that work, and providing kind of training and teaching and development of people who are doing that. And then increasingly we're moving to a place where a lot of my work has to do with creating some uniformity across our policy teams around how we approach our work, particularly with intersectional lens around racial justice and racial equity. And so like I just did a training for all of our policy teams last week about how we can use equity and justice informed like research, data, and historical analysis to do the work that we do. And so that's kind of an emerging area of my work. And I will stop there and let other people go, but just to give you a little flavor.
Fantastic. Oh, I can see the questions already are going to be coming. Robin, you are next on my screen.
Hey everyone, nice to meet you all. I think I finished at Trachtenberg in like 2000 and I'd have to look at my resume. 11, maybe 12, something like that. 10, 2010, I believe. But I don't actually remember now. So I'm currently in the Department of Health and Human Services Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, or ASPE. It's an amazing place to work. I highly recommend it. If you can find a spot here, our staffing is not growing, but it's one of the places in the federal government where you can leverage all of the great policy analysis evaluation methods that you have studied at Trachtenberg School. I'm the director of data and technical analysis there. I lead a team of about 14 master's level and PhD level economists, social scientists, sociologists, community psychologists that are doing really interesting work across a huge range of human services programs. If you can think of it as going under the bucket of human services, we're working on it, from human trafficking, refugee resettlement, child support, child abuse and neglect, etc. Like a whole home visiting, Head Start, the whole gamut. I had an interesting career pathway to get here. Coming out of the Trachtenberg School, I started the GAO and quickly realized that wasn't the place where I could use the sort of data and analytical tools that I really loved learning about at the Trachtenberg School. And I think the GW really gives students the opportunity to really explore as much as you want. And so after a few years at GAO, I kind of moved to agency positions where I could do more applied analytical work. I'll just touch on a couple points that that Denise asked us to talk about, but just like really briefly, and then I'm sure there'll be more discussion on them. I think I have some very strong feelings about the way data science, or what could be called data science, are currently taught in graduate programs. I think what I've learned really over the past decade and a half in federal government, I do think some of the big trends that I've seen, an increased reliance, or want to have reliance on the use of administrative data, and the need to understand the pros and cons of it, the strengths and weaknesses of it, what it can do and what it definitely cannot do. And I think that that's something that it's hard to learn a lot about in graduate school, or even in like the non-federal space, or the non-governmental space, I should say, because it usually you don't have access to that data unless you are in an agency. So knowing how to work with it is really important. And like I've brought on research fellows, those that have experience working with administrative data are like top candidates for me. I think taking a data science approach to analysis, I've seen an increased acceptance of that, as opposed to kind of like the theory-driven methods that we see a lot of times in academia. I think in government work, it's more about what questions can you answer with the data that you have available, as opposed to what's like the most rigorous method that should be applied, because that often isn't one that you can actually do, or won't get you the result that is useful in the time you need it. And then I think just the last thing that I'll mention, and then I'll pass it on to the next person. Alicia talked about equity, and I think equity through data, or it's called so many different things. I like to call it equity through data, but other people call it equitable data, or data equity. I think they're all misnomers, because we just still don't know exactly what we're talking about. But I've seen that not even only in this administration, but beforehand, it's increasingly become an important thing for people to understand, is how data can increase equity, how it can exacerbate inequities, what are approaches to take analytically, what are approaches to take, including different community perspectives. So I'll stop there.
Very exciting. This is great. Clint, I'm going to go next to you.
Hi, team. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Clint Trocchio. Hi to our panelists. Denise, thank you for the invite today. To Dr. Adams, are you out there, sir? There he is. X covary Y. X precede Y. What's the last one? Rule out the Z, right? So there we go. Thumbs up. All right. I learned something. Good. Fantastic. And Yevgen, good to see you again, classmate. Great to see you, sir. My name is Clint. I'm a Coast Guard retiree. While I was at Trachtenberg, I did the MPA program and moved my classes to at night so I could jump up here to the Hill. I had an opportunity with a friend here who was in an office, and I ended up retiring from the service. And I stayed here on the Senate's Committee on Appropriations. Right now, I'm the chief clerk and the head of policy innovation on one of the Senate's largest committees on the Hill. I wear a lot of hats, administrator, operator, policy analyst, even scorekeeper with CBO. We're the ones that are holding up the money train. My apologies. We're doing the best we can in the environment. And we're pleased to have had 24 finish, FY24 finish. And we're now turning our attention to FY25. And the data train will continue. One of our roles in this office is to help the chair and the vice chair and our members use evidence as policy, data-driven evidence. And about 5 years ago, we began a new initiative for transparency and reform that brought what everyone colloquially knows as earmarks back to the Hill. The committee is now back into congressionally directed spending, and that is one of our major data sets that we're building here on the committee. We build applications, we build software, we build solutions for our staff. But one of the monikers from one of our classes at Trachtenberg was in the Congress class, the legislative branch class was, what are the wins and losses that you've seen recently in the news in DC? And now the dashboards and the analytics that we have brought over the last 5 years contribute to those wins and losses. I never thought that way back at Trachtenberg, I would be part of that wins and losses machine. But now the analytics that we've built here on the Hill, particularly in congressionally directed spending, make that evident. It'll be great to hear from everyone. I'll cut it short there and defer to, I think, Angela.
Angela, bring it home.
Hi there. Also a student of Professor Adams. And Robin, my husband, is a PhD student who does research using CMS administrative data. So I've heard a lot about the funds of using that, and probably way more than I ever would like to know. So unlike the other panelists, I do not work in the government, but I am currently at Meta, and I am part of a team that partners with our product team, so the folks who actually build the algorithms that power all of our various functionalities of the platform. So for example, what reels you recommended on Instagram and Facebook, how things are aggregated under certain hashtags. We partner with them to, while our engineers and the product teams think about what features are needed and do the actual coding for those features to come live. Our team helps them think through what are the data that they need to train, test, and improve on those algorithms. So if you're thinking about what reel is recommended, our team is the one who thinks about, like, how do we even identify what certain reels are about en masse, and how do we make sure that certain things are recognized on the platform when they're not appropriate, and so on and so forth. So the policy is establishing some of the underlying policies that help the machines identify content. And the way that, while that's not directly government related, it is obviously highly impacted by what happens in the environment, since, government regulations, the financial environment, and all of that highly dictate what kind of projects come our way, what is prioritized, and so on and so forth. Additionally, the work that we do, so thinking about the, financial environment, right, and tech companies no longer being able to continuously invest in whatever play area they want to think about. Our team is heavily relied on to help kind of normalize across our project portfolios and take a data mindset and make recommendations about what projects are worthwhile to invest in and what are worth continuing and changing, so that we're staying consistent with meeting the goals that higher ups are setting for the vision of our platforms. And then of course with the introduction of AI and the way that we're continuously we're in real time changing how we interact with technology. We're also relied upon that to help advance some of our generative AI platforms that Meta provides. So when I think about the role that Trachtenberg has played in my career is like, yes, I am not in a traditional government policy related role, but I rely heavily on kind of the underlying skill set because the folks that I work with are data scientists, they are researchers, and it is helpful to have the common language with them. But I think one of the best skills taught that I've developed in Trachtenberg is also just being flexible and being kind of adaptive and thinking about, public policy is, we don't take a framework and apply it in the traditional sense of how an economist would or a statistician. I would say that's like the biggest difference, right? We're the applied folks. And so that's something I have to do in every day, right? I'm not in a traditional policy role yet. We call it policy too, right? Establishing what we think about, what our regulations are, what our criteria are. And all of those are skills that have come from my MPP.
Fantastic. Well, I would love to open it up to questions. As I said, I have questions I could use, but I always prefer to have questions from the participants. So if you have a question, if you want to raise your hand or put that into the chat box. I see Bill is ready. We'll start with Bill, and then if others have questions, just raise your hand. Bill gets the call out. I mean, everybody's connected to Bill here today.
It's my lucky day. Great to see y'all again. Listen, real quick, let me just do a quick survey and we can do show of hands. So I promise this will be short and sweet and quick. So I'm really curious because we were just having this discussion in a curriculum planning meeting the other day. So what you have to, your experience is really relevant here. And I think Alicia said that she doesn't actually calculate multiple regression herself, but she uses, she's a consumer of it. Is that correct? So I'd like to ask all of you if you find yourself as a consumer of multiple regression analysis, could you raise your hand? Okay, only one, two, and anybody calculating it, conducting multiple regression? Robin, are you? Okay, and so then I guess the others of you are not using it at all. It's not, Clint, it's not a part of your job, which is fine. I'm just trying to get a quick overview. Then t-test. Is anybody using t-test? Anybody? As a consumer? Nobody's using t-test.
Yeah, I would say Bill, but only for when we've done work with survey data like microdata from the current population survey or like the various health surveys. Then we would be doing tests of basic bivariate tests of statistical significance, like a t-test or chi-squared.
T-test or chi-squared. Anybody else using using chi-square at all? Coming as a consumer, are you checking chi-square test besides Robin? Okay, it's fascinating. And just I assume all of you are using crosstabs, percentages, basic statistical kind of data like that. In terms of statistical software, anybody using SPSS? SAS? Excel? Everybody's using Excel. Clint, what are y'all using?
We use R quite a bit. We don't use it necessarily to I suppose provide statistical outputs, but we use the dplyr library quite a bit, and we use it for production purposes. Frankly, a lot of our applications are built towards not necessarily analysis. We'd love to be an analysis body. Capitol Hill is not necessarily an analysis body, but a lot of our services are towards speed of production. What we like to call in this office speed to law. So to the extent that these tools can make us faster, good.
Okay, one more quick question, and then I'll pass the baton to everybody else. If to the people who are in the program now, is there a course that you wish you had taken and didn't, or is there a course that we should offer and as far as you know we're not? Anybody?
Well, I don't know if you guys offer this or not, but the things that I think would be really useful is actually figuring out how to like create narratives and data visualizations using applied statistics, because that is like the bread and butter of what we do. And that would involve, I mean, I don't know that y'all, as Robin said, administrative data experience is great, but at a minimum, being used to using large government surveys like ACS or CPS, I think would be huge.
We actually have a new course that's become very popular in the last 2 years called Data Visualization Using R.
I would second what Alicia said, and to your earlier question, Professor Adams. So prior to Meta, I was at Deloitte and then at Bloomberg, and I think one of the things that I found is kind of missing when I left MPP is that I felt like I had all of these great skills and understanding of how to apply data in different settings, and not all of us go on to be policy or analysts. But the skills that I had in terms of analyzing large data sets were for systems that I did not have access to. So just wish that I took courses with using SPSS, SAS, and Stata, and I just wish I'd had a little bit more basics in Excel, and even some data visualization in Tableau would have been helpful. Even in Excel would have been helpful. It just was crazy to have, know how to do econometrics, but not know how to write a VLOOKUP, which was something that was more required of someone in my role. And I think data there's no job these days that doesn't require some awareness of basic statistics and understanding of data. And it just would have been helpful to have kind of the basic tools. I felt like I felt like I was at a 10 without having like the 1 to 5. And what I really needed was the 1 to 5.
Right.
Yeah, I would add to that. We've found success here with tools that run in parallel. We want the enterprise product, and government is leaned on for its stability. So I don't want to be running 1.7 trillion on an Excel file. We're going to do that on a more sturdy platform. But Excel is a necessary derivative application that we've found it's pervasive, and it reaches all corners of subject matters. Building the new enterprise applications here, you've heard it across government. Modernization is important. It's no different here on the committee. We have old applications. They're not mainframes, but our moves towards Python and R, JavaScript, these web applications have really helped us. So any courseware that would provide application of those tool sets with a relevant data set would be fantastic.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna go ahead until I see some other questions coming in for questions that I gave you all. And one of them I think is interesting is, kind of building on what we've already been said, is in the past few years, how has your work changed as a result of what we're seeing around data expertise, and how have you adapted, both in terms of some of what you're talking about now, specific software you're using, skill sets, but what have you done to adapt to this, in thinking about the lens of some students now and how they're preparing themselves?
Okay, I don't mind being the first one to speak up on this. I have seen, so if I mentioned before some of the trends that I've seen, and I'll just reiterate them a little bit. I think it's interesting. I would say maybe like, I'm not going to get this exactly right, but maybe like 20 years ago, there was a big shift towards evaluation, maybe a little longer ago than that, towards rigorous evaluation, RCTs, econometrics, a really heavy quantitative work. And I think right now I've seen a really interesting shift. It's not that the pendulum has switched back, but I think there is a little bit of currently a reaction to what is perceived to be an over reliance on these positivist type epistemologies or approaches to like learning. And there's a much broader acceptance now of the need for qualitative methods, non-reductive methods, incorporating perspectives of people with lived experience into the research, the evaluation, and the policy work. I think maybe like mixed methods is often like a broad catch-all, which I find very poorly defined. So it's not that people are abandoning like the more quantitative work, but they're kind of wanting to pair it up with these other types of ways of knowing. And I think there's a lot of value. No one person can be an expert in all of these methods, of course. You can't be an expert econometrician or data scientists and know everything there is to know about qualitative research and know how to do community engagement in analysis. You can't really expect to do all of that. So, I mean, my advice is like, find what draws you and carve out that niche, get that expertise, and then you'll find work doing that. But it's important to kind of know, not to be an expert in all of it, but to know all facets of it. Like, you don't have to be a GIS technician, but you should know what GIS is and what it can and cannot do. You don't have to know how to run an RCT. It's nice to know what an RCT is good for and when it's not good for. You don't need to know how to do Bayesian statistics, but it's important to know what it is. And like, if you see someone using Bayesian stats, like how you may interpret that different than like other types of statistics. So I think there's rather than, we hear a lot about like machine learning and AI and how that's the way of the future. In government work, what I've seen is the way of the future is like incorporating all of these methodological approaches to address complex questions, because none of them really gets at this like objective reality. Everything is a guess. And so I think it's important to really have an understanding of all of the tools that are out there and how they operate. And then like, just figure out, what are you good at? What do you like doing? And know the strengths and limitations of that.
Yeah, and I'll say that at least the spaces that I've occupied, something that continues to be important is everyone's talking about, right? Like, everything needs to be data driven. Everyone's looking for some kind of data to back a decision, to back kind of help inform the path forward, but not. While everyone understands that there is a need for data, no one understands data. And so I think, something that it makes folks like us important in the sense that we have this skill set, that it's desirable, but at the same time, we're mostly interacting with people who, dabble or don't know. And so it's just, I think what's really important is to be the chameleon, or to be the translator, the person who can occupy both spaces, be the one who can be in the data, who can do the complex analysis, but then feel comfortable speaking to it in easy terms, because you're often feeding those for others to share, for others to make decisions that aren't going to have that same level and depth of expertise. So it doesn't matter what, you may be running certain, whatever methodologies you're using, the person you're feeding this to wants to know, like, the so what in the easiest terms. And you're also going to have to be comfortable kind of speaking about why whatever they're saying is needed or wanted, why that answer doesn't exist, or why that answer isn't so easy. And then I think with the rise of AI, right, everyone's like, can we automate this? Can we automate that? But there isn't that clear understanding of, like, data need to be in systems a certain way, and they need to be, normalized a certain way, and they need to have consistency as people are adding on, like, let's add this system and let's add that system because this company makes it available and that company makes it available. And you have to somehow figure out how to make them kind of talk. And that standardization, I think, is not appreciated, because again, everyone wants the, like, final shiny, good printout at the very end with a beautiful dashboard. So think being the person who can think through all of that, not just the analysis, but think about data from its full life cycle, I think is really, really important.
Anything else to add before we go to a question that came in the chat? So this is a great question that came in. Question for all panelists, maybe Alicia and Rob in particular. How do you build equity into your data work? Any pitfalls we should keep our eyes out for as we look to incorporate it into our work?
I can get us started because I think this question builds off really nicely about some of the stuff that Robin just said, which I would plus up both what Robin and Angela just said, but that, like, we're moving away from this place. And I think where you get into trouble, right, is this idea that, like, data are neutral and objective, data are the final word on everything. And I feel like that was so the mood like 10 years ago, and really starting to learn how to be, like, a critical consumer of data and analysis, because, like, research is done by human beings who have flaws, right? In the same way we see, like, sometimes AI, turns out to be really racist because it was fed off of human data. So remembering that, like, we try and adapt. We've been talking about this thing at the center called just adapting the practice of reflexivity, which is really going in and, like, really questioning your assumptions at every kind of step of the way. And I think an important piece, right, is, well, I'll drop a resource in the chat that I really like, but, like, you should be kind of asking questions at every step of the way. Like, who is counted? Who is not counted in this? Why are they not counted? Why might they be undercounted? How was this research done? Who did it? Particularly in this place where we're moving increasingly towards bringing in qualitative analysis and bringing in the perspective of people with lived experience of, say, at least in my field, like poverty or using social safety net programs. A lot of research is done on these communities as opposed to with them. And, like, that can be very extractive and harmful, potentially. So are we doing research with integrity and with care? Are we losing sight of the fact that, like, these are human beings, not just little dots on a map, right? And I think, like, a thing that we really try and push for, right, is whenever I can't get the data that I want, which is all the time, right? You're always going to want to be able to tell a story, and you're not going to be able to have all the data that you need to do it. I have to ask myself, how can I get creative and, like, find other ways to bring to bear, like, important pieces of this narrative, whether it is perspectives of people who are left out or who are not counted. Are there simply things that we can't capture well in the data? So to give you an example, like, some of my work involves the housing choice voucher program, which lets you, gives you a housing subsidy and you rent from a private landlord, right? And we can see, like, where people move, or like how fast are they able to use their voucher, or what percentage of landlords will accept them. But we don't know what people's preferences are in terms of their housing. We don't know about like how was the experience of actually going through and trying to use this program, right? Those are things that you have to be able to ask people and tell those more fulsome stories. So I feel like the biggest thing is like and it is a process to keep learning how to like check yourself, and oftentimes to sometimes push back. I would also say, remember that like you will not get what you don't ask for. So sometimes a thing that I will do is, if someone has published a study in academia or from government, I will email them and I will ask, I will be like, can you run these extra numbers for me? Why isn't this here? Can we talk about it? And actually start to form those relationships with people in this field, which will actually help, create the changes that you want to see, right? So I just want to really emphasize that, like, you coming out of this program, learn to be an active and critical consumer, but you also have a role, particularly depending on like the type of work that you end up doing, to also kind of push back what you want to see.
And my team, so we are often involved to help kind of drive equity in the way our platforms recognize things, right? So as it is mostly machine learning driven, it is really important that we bring that human component so that we can check what our machines are doing. And of course, it's not always perfect, but that's where we're the ones who create the guidelines to say, okay, how do we recognize this or that? And then we run those by multiple people and testing, and there's a lot of validation of what the machine is doing before it goes public, to kind of keep in mind that there is some form of equity that may not be recognized, or certain types of biases that are introduced by the way that individuals may code something. And that is especially also important in how we think about setting up a project. So because there are individuals who take those guidelines and apply them a certain way, often those folks are maybe English speakers, so maybe whatever language that's required for the project, but they may be in another country and they're fluent in that language. And those are the things that we have to keep in mind as well, because cultural differences may help in how, or may bias how you identify something, right? So let's say we're categorizing content as, is this funny? Well, funny is a very cultural dependent thing, and just speaking the language is not sufficient. What may seem funny may be racist to us, right? Because, and you don't have that context if you're not American. So those are the things that we think about, and we try to be conscious of. And I think bringing that conscious thinking into it is an effort to help alleviate kind of lack of equity. But obviously we're not often in the news for nothing, right? So it can't always be perfect. But at least I think the fact that teams like mine exist is a step in the right direction.
Anyone else to add to that one? For we have another question that came in on the chat.
For time, I'll just put some thoughts in the chat, Denise, if you want to go ahead and ask the next question.
Great, thank you. The panel, someone wrote to the panelists, and also to Melissa and myself, obviously demonstrated the need for data skills in public policy. While this student is in the MPP and data science certificate joint degree, almost all of the data classes are with data science department and technical. How do you use those technical skills in a policy context and effectively explain methods learned in data science classes?
Enroll in the MPP program.
The person is in the, Bill, the student is in the MPP program with the data science certificate joint degree.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I thought it was just the certificate program.
So it's having an understanding of how to use those technical skills more in a policy context.
So I'll kick it off, and then try not to talk too long, because this is something that I've dealt with my entire career. I took a lot of courses in the data science type courses outside of Trachtenberg School. You know, I think in the policy world, understanding methods isn't something that people care too much about. Telling someone what your R squared is, or telling someone that you controlled for these variables. There are going to be people who ask you for that, but policy decision makers, in my experience, of course, it's not having to work with everybody, but work with a lot of people, and they want to know what the results mean and how to interpret it, and then they're relying on you to validate that you use rigorous methods, adequately rigorous methods, and relying on you to point out the limitations of it. They're not going to ask you for that, in my experience, in the federal policy space. So I think, if I were to say like one or two pieces of advice really briefly, and then I can more than happy to talk one-on-one about it. Use the broad techniques that you've learned to address the complicated problems and the data strengths limitations you have. Don't worry about if the person you're sharing the results with is going to understand the methods. But you need to think about how to boil down your results, not in a 40-page research paper. And Alicia, I know you're agreeing with you 100% in the work that you at the center. Can this be said in one page? Can it be said in a paragraph? Can it be said in a sentence? And that's where the rubber meets the road. The hard part is not doing the analysis, definitely not. And I've done a lot of really hard analyses. The hard part is taking the analysis and explaining it to someone in a way that's meaningful to them. So I'm kind of flipping your question around a little bit, instead of thinking about like, it's really about what do the results mean to the people who you're trying to share them with.
If I could add,
Fantastic.
sorry, if I could add, perhaps this idea I have here about this solution. If you're working in a technical space and perhaps bridging over to a policy space, perhaps the solution, at least we've found, is if you can straddle those two different universes and you can bring people together with that skill set and break down silos. In our environment here, that has been the win. So if you're a policy analyst and you need tool sets that can perhaps bring business divisions together, bring subcommittees together that don't talk, bring parties and chambers together that don't talk. Those two skill sets, if you can bring, it's a very EQ way, bring people together and have them talk, that's a win.
That's great. It kind of aligns to what Alicia wrote in response to Brady's about being the bridge between the really technical folks, the policymakers, and the media. Before we open up the breakout rooms, is there any last thoughts to some of these final questions that the panelists wanted to add before I give our attendees an opportunity to have some individual time with any of you? So if not, I want to thank all of our panelists. As Bill just wrote in the chat, and since this is being recorded, just to say he really hit the nail. Genuinely exciting to hear what you're doing, your thoughtful insights. We did a panel last week on AI. This fits in with this around the data expertise. It's a very rapidly changing world of work. And the Trachtenberg School, we are trying to stay ahead of the curve, and bringing in our alumni panelists who are in the field doing this work is invaluable to us. So really want to thank you all so much for sharing your expertise, your guidance, and your time with all of us.